Hey guys, welcome back to Jenn Reads Romance. I'm Jenn, and today I'm going to be doing my monthly wrap-up for January. And the first part of this video is going to wrap up the last week of January. I decided to kind of combine the videos because I'm kind of pressed on time for recording these days. And I definitely wanted to go into greater detail with the books that I read this past week and then kind of do an overall summary for January 2021. I think I did an amazing start for the year, and I'm not expecting to read this many books in a month again. But first, let's talk about the 9 books that I read this past week. I kind of put off this video because I was trying to finish one more, but it didn't happen, but that's okay. Those particular books were arcs, and I'm going to go into greater detail in a vlog that I'm doing for those. So that'll be coming later on in the week, and I'm really excited to talk about these books because it was an interesting mashup that I had this week. So the first book I have is Stanton Adore by T.L. Swan. My romance journey with T.L. Swan has been an interesting one because I read her most recent books, the ones that she's currently in the middle of writing. She's writing The Miles High Club, and The Stopover and The Takeover are 2 books that I really enjoyed, and I immediately put The Takeover on the podcast because I love it so much, and Juliet loved it so much, so we were like, oh my god, we love it. T.L. Swan is a new favorite author. So I was like, I want to go back to her backlist, and Jen did a whole video. I'll link her video down below, and it's a guide to like T.L. Swan as an author. So I decided to go all the way back to the beginning to her very first book, which is Stanton Adore. It's part of the Stanton series, and this series focuses on one couple, and it's Natasha and Joshua. This is a taboo romance, not so taboo romance. Slight spoiler if you don't want to know, but this is marketed as, you know, a taboo incesty relationship because they're first cousins, but we do find out within the first book that they're not really first cousins. So if you're worried about that kind of stuff, then just letting you know that this is spoiler, but if you're turned off by that type of thing, but they do think that they're cousins, so it is still taboo. Anyway, this is a taboo romance between 2 first cousins, and I'm here for the taboo. I had no problem with the storyline going forward, and I thought that was very interesting. We were introduced to these 2 characters, and they're teenagers, and we don't quite know their relationship yet. We know that Natasha is very in love with Joshua. Then we fast forward to the present day, and she has just closed herself off to any type of like emotion with anybody else. She's had some serious boyfriends, but her emotions for them never quite match what they felt for her because she's pining away after Joshua, who had left Australia to go to America. He had an internship with Apple to study under Steve Jobs, which I thought that was pretty funny, and he's a famous app developer, like he has paparazzi and stuff. He comes back to Australia because his brother's getting married, and this is when Natasha and Joshua reconnect, and let me tell you, this relationship starts going real fast on the night of the wedding. Stuff is happening like quite out in the open, and I'm just like, is this really happening? Like, everyone can see this, and it's just crazy. I find it interesting because Natasha is a psychologist, and she deals with people who have intimacy problems, and she's basically a sex therapist. And the first time that we meet her and she's talking to some of her clients, she comes across as very confident and poised, but for some reason when Joshua starts coming on the scene, she turns into a very immature character. I forced myself to finish this book. I did not like it, and you can see there is a drastic difference in writing between T.L. Swan writing Stanton Adore and T.L. Swan writing The Stopover and The Takeover. I think she's improved astronomically. I would not have said this is the same author. If you would have just given me these books, like read this, read that, I would have been like, these are 2 completely different authors. They don't sound the same at all, which is why I usually start with an author's most recent series that they're writing, because a lot of authors do improve with time. They find their footing and they do better with plotting, characterization, pacing, and I find that this has definitely happened for T.L. Swan. So I'm really glad that I read The Stopover and The Takeover first, because Stanton Adore, I gave this book a 2-star. I don't even know if it deserves a 2-star because it was that bad. The formatting is really bad too, because we'll have a paragraph where it's just dialogue, just quotation marks, like nothing else besides dialogue, and it's 2 different characters speaking, and I couldn't tell which one was speaking. It was just formatted really, really weird, and then the hero's point of view was bolded the whole chapter, even though we were told at the beginning of that chapter whose point of view we were in. I thought that was really weird, and she continues that in her standalones as well. but not for the Miles High Club. So anyway, it just felt completely different. I did not like the way that Joshua and Natasha's relationship were unfolding. It was very up and down, hot and cold. They were very, very immature characters. And I hate the way that Joshua talked to Natasha, and she talked to him too, but he was always like telling her to like fuck off, calling her a bitch and a drama queen, and I was just like, wow, this is a lot. But anyway, so that one, not so great. Then I read Inked in Lies by Gianna Darling, and this book was so good. I love this book so much. This is another kind of forbidden romance. It's a foster brother and his foster sister, but the way that this plays out, it is beautiful. So Nova is a tattoo artist, and he's been knowing Lila since she was 5 years old, and he was there when some very tough things were happening in her life. And his family, and let me tell you that his family is like one of the best things about this book. I love them so, so, so much. Nova was there from like day one. As soon as they moved into the neighborhood, he latched on to Lila, and he kind of became this protector, and he joined forces with her brother to make sure that she was okay, because her father is a criminal. She was around a lot of unsavory characters. She had to grow up really, really, really fast, and something happened and she got put into foster care, but Nova was the one that campaigned really hard, and his family took her in because they loved her so much. So now she's all grown up. She's always had feelings for Nova. They developed from, you know, this person makes me feel safe and he's my protector, to, wow, I'm really attracted to him. And she eventually does try to make a move, but he shuts it down real quick. And so 2 years after she made her move, then he was like, no. She's like, okay, fine, I'm moving on. And Nova has no choice but to notice Lila, and that she's growing up, and that he's very jealous of the guy that she's with. And I just love their romance so much. The pacing was beautiful. I just loved everything. There was lots of drama. Even though I'm not a huge fan of like the MC plotline, the overall plotline with like the mayor and stuff, I find him to just be like a very one-dimensional villain. I don't really care for any of that background drama. I'm here for the characters. And what Gianna does with these characters, it's so good. Then I read Will You Be Mine by Rilsey Adams. This is part of her series. They're novellas, and this is the Falling Like a Johnson series. And so there's a bunch of Johnson siblings, and JT is the next Johnson sibling. And this is a I'm pining for my best friend romance. And they have to fake date because she's going to the wedding of like her ex love. She had a crush on this guy when she was in high school, and there's lots and lots of drama between Hallie and her high school crush's fiance, soon to be wife. There's lots of drama that goes on, and JT is kind of like the rogue of the family. His father is a very prominent lawyer. He actually went to law school, and then he dropped out because he's like, you know what, I'm an artist and I want to sculpt things. And he even did a series on Hallie. He got Hallie to pose nude for him so he could do sketches, not her face, and sold the sculptures. And I didn't quite love this romance. The first book in this series had such a bonkers plot to it, and I loved it way more than this one. This was more like a simple, straightforward, I'm in love with my best friend, I have to pretend to fake date her so she can go to this wedding of somebody who she used to have a crush on and feel pretty much unfazed. But I feel like it was so much things that happen, and for a novella length book, I felt like a lot of it was underexplored. And unfortunately, I felt like the relationship between JT and Hallie was very underexplored, because Hallie had like zero feelings towards JT for the majority of the book. The way that she still felt like she was not over this high school guy. She was not over him, and there was lots of situations that needed to have closure for them. Like, I agree, but it felt like she was like questioning herself, like, am I going to this wedding? Am I going to try to stop this wedding? You know, she hated his fiance. His sister doesn't like her, and I'm just like, this is nuts. So I didn't feel satisfied with Hallie's feelings toward JT. I needed more from her. and it wrapped up way too quickly once she finally noticed JT's feelings, and I was just not feeling it as a romance. So 3 stars for Will You Be Mine. I'm still continuing with the series because I still love Rosie Adams. Then I read The Merman's Kiss by Tamsin Leigh. This book was from BookBub. It was free, and it's really funny because during our reading sprints on Tuesdays, I was in the chat and Izzy was actually reading it. That was the day that this came out on BookBub, and I was like, I got that one too. And so I started reading it. It was very short, very novella length, and it is a merman and a human romance, but the tone of this book was kind of all over the place because it starts off pretty dark. Brianna is our heroine, and she has experienced a stillbirth. She is in deep depression, and her husband Eric is just not there for her at all. He just seems completely unaffected by the situation. And so in the very first chapter, there's an attempted suicide scene, and I was just like, wow. So she ties weights to her waist and jumps into the ocean, and it goes crazily fast from there because she's sinking to the bottom. She's kind of having some second thoughts. She wants to get the weights off of her hips, and so she's like, well, I need to take off my pants, they're hindering it. So like her pants come off, but conveniently her panties come off with it, and then like there's something happened where her shirt comes off, and now she's just like naked in the ocean. And this merman comes swim up to her and kisses her, and as soon as he kisses her, she like latches on to him with her legs, and she is just like, let's get it on. And she had just inhaled water, like she was drowning, but now all of a sudden she's literally riding this merman's dick, and I'm just like, what is happening? What? The whole concept of like a merman romance intrigues me a lot, but I feel like the merman culture really just wasn't compelling enough for me, because in this world, mermen are like the caretakers. They're like the stay-at-home dads, and the mermaids are very not maternal at all. They basically screw everything, and everyone that moves, including humans, they take them underwater. Oh, by the way, the merman's kiss actually allows Brianna to breathe underwater, but like they don't know how long it lasts, and so she has to stay by him for an indefinite time so that she won't drown. That really isn't explained. The whole magic of this is just starting to be explored in this series. I felt like it could have used a little bit more world building, but the mermaids are terrible. They're crazy, they're evil, and I hate them. And I think like the 3rd book has a mermaid in it. I don't know, maybe she's like a different kind of mermaid. Maybe she doesn't want to like poison and rape mermen because they're like sex maniacs. I don't know, it's crazy. But all of the underwater scenes, which the majority of this book happens underwater in the ocean, it was very depressing. It was very lonely because mermen are very solitary creatures. They don't allow other mermen to come into their homes, and it's a wild ride, and I didn't really love it. And there was lots of like boobs bobbing, and it was just weird imagery. Yeah, 2 stars. Then I reread Love Lettering for our Patreon exclusive. That was the book that our patrons voted on for us to review in January, and this was the first book that I read in 2020, and I hadn't read it since then. And this was a real fun experience because, as I was telling everybody during our live review, I had an arc of love lettering for 2020, and I almost DNF'd this book. And this book is a 5-star read for me. I almost DNF'd it because it was hard for me to connect with the character. I was like 10% in, and I was like, just a couple more chapters, let's just see. And I'm glad that I did because I ended up by loving it. Like I said, 5-star romance. It's just a really sweet, interesting concept, and I love these 2 characters so much. Meg is a freelance artist, and she does calligraphy really beautifully. So she designs like wedding invitations. Well, she did like one wedding, got pretty famous for it, and then decided not to because she has this problem where she hides messages in her artistry. And the husband of this couple, when he came in, he observed how they were together, and she was like, that's not gonna last. And so in their wedding invitation, she kind of like hid in this hidden code, and it spelled out mistake, and he found it. So the 2 MCs of this romance are very cerebral, but in different ways. She's very creative in the way that she thinks about words is almost like mathematical, and Reese, the hero, is like a numbers genius. And I just love their dynamic because they seem like total opposites, but they're so alike, and it was just beautiful. I love this romance. So if you had a hard time pushing through and you like put that book aside or DNF'd it, I would recommend you give this book a second chance, because I almost DNF'd it and I ended up by really loving it. Then that leads me to the next 4 books that I read. They are all arcs. I'm doing a vlog on them. I'm not going to go into great detail, but I will let you know what I rated the books that I've read so far. So the first one that I read was Don't Kiss the Bride by Kieran Cole. And this was one of my most anticipated books of the year. And I think I'm going to have to rate this book a 3-star. It just didn't land with me. And I have lots of thoughts as to why, because it had all of the elements that I love in a romance. It has age gap, a little bit of a forbidden romance, and Kieran Cole is definitely skilled at creating these very unique characters. I find that all of her characters are pretty unique, and I love these characters. How she set them up, their backstory, I really enjoy that aspect of it, but there were some things that didn't work for me, so I'll be talking about that in my vlog. If you want to know more, I'll let you know more. Then I read Love at First, which is the second book that I've read by Kate Claiborne. It's coming out soon on the 23rd. So this was very different, completely unconnected to Love Lettering. This is a complete standalone and a very different story. And I love these characters so much. I gave this book 4.5 stars, almost 5 stars, but I'm rounding it up to 5 stars on Goodreads because Goodreads doesn't have half stars, which they should. Always gonna complain about it. So the start of this romance is very interesting. We're introduced to Will, the hero, and he's 15 years old. His mom's like, get in the car, make sure you don't tell your father. They go and they meet Will's uncle that he never knew he had. This is his mother's brother. And he's not very inviting. And his mother is like, why don't you stand outside of this apartment building and I'm gonna talk with your uncle. Now, Will has been denying that he needs glasses. He plays baseball and he sees like other kids wearing glasses and he doesn't want to be that kid. So anyway, just like a little bit backstory, he hears this voice and she says, hey, and it like affects him so much and he's like, what is this voice? So it's like love at first sound, love at first hey. So he's like, who is this girl? And he looks up, and at first he thinks that the girl is talking to him. And then he later realizes as he squints that she's talking to this squirrel that's going after her grandmother's plants on the balcony. And he is like trying to be suave and cool. She like threw a tomato at the squirrel and it like hit him on the head, Will. He picks up the tomato and he's like going over like, how is he going to introduce himself? Like, did you drop something and stuff? And it's really cute. But he overhears something from his mom and his uncle through the open door that makes him stop and reevaluate. And all we know that is that whatever he overhears changes the course of his life as we know it. It was like he was slapped with reality, this reality that he didn't know about, and he's forced to grow up really fast. So when all we know is that he returns home with his mother, they never talk about the conversation, even though she knows that he overheard, and he quit baseball, he got glasses, and he just like kept his head down and started like studying really hard. 16 years later, he is a doctor, he's an emergency room doctor, and he inherits the apartment that his uncle occupied. He goes back to the apartment and lo and behold, Nora is still there, the heroine. And this is such a sweet romance. It has amazing characters, and there's also like a side bromance that happens here between Will and his superior at the hospital that was hilarious and endearing, and I loved it. So 5 stars, it was great. The next arc that I have is actor A.G. Brown, and Talia Hibbert is just my favorite type of rom-com author at the moment. I just love the way that she writes her characters. They're so quirky. The Britishisms in the Brown Sister series are just my vibe. I love it. The way that Eve's parents and siblings all call her like darling and stuff like that. But Eve is the flighty sister. She doesn't know what she's doing with life. Her parents are just kind of like, you got to get your act together. We're going to cut off your trust fund. And Eve kind of like stumbles into this small town, decides, why not? I'm going to interview for this chef position at this bed and breakfast. She meets Jacob. Jacob's on the autism spectrum, and he's like, I love how he's sitting there and he's like putting 2 O's and an X because like 2 marks in her favor and 1 mark in not her favor, and he gave her like an extra O because he couldn't stop staring at her boobs. But it's just, this romance is interesting. It has very enemies to lovers vibes, and Talia Hibbert has like such a unique voice, and I love her banter between characters. These two were absolute delight. They're so delightful and they're so different. Like Eve is so different from her sisters, so different from Chloe, so different from Danny. And their dynamic, period, was just unique to the Brown sisters, and I love this book, 5 stars. And lastly, I read The Heiress Hunt by Joanna Shupe, another arc, and this is the first book in her Something Rebel series. Oh my god. The Fifth Avenue Rebel series. By the way, I have my Airtable open like right here so that I can salt it, and thank goodness, because this has been a lifesaver. It's made it so easy for me to do these wrap-ups. So Archer, his name's Harrison Archer. So Harrison, his family is pretty like well known in New York society. This is a Gilded Age historical romance, and he has always been in love with his best friend Maddie, and Maddie has not felt the same. And when he found out that she didn't feel the same, and she is completely unaware that he had any feelings for her, he leaves for Paris and he's gone for 3 years. But now he's back. He's made his fortune quietly, and he's kind of let it circulate that he was like a typical second son who was just kind of like running through his parents' money, living off, you know, his allowance, and just sleeping his way through Paris and getting drunk, whatever. But he was actually building up an immense fortune because his father mismanaged his business and his brother is not much better, and they're about to go under. And so Archer's plans for vengeance, because he and his family do not have a good relationship, is to do a hostile takeover of the business. And they think that Harrison is on their side and is going to marry an heiress to help them out, to inject some funds into this business. And when at first he was like, hell no, and then they listed a bunch of eligible heiresses, and his mother reminds him that the one that he hung around with, the mannish girl that he hung around with, is still available, even though there's some rumor about this duke courting her. And then he's finally like, fine, I'll take a look at the list. And so now that he knows that Maddie is still available, he is kind of like, this is my second chance. So he contacts Maddie, and under the guise of like, hey, as a friend, would you help me find a wife, an heiress? And she's like, sure, I'll help you. But his entire plan is to win her over. And this was such an interesting romance because Maddie was really cool. She is an avid tennis player, and she was actually going to compete competitively, and she's always loved tennis, and her parents were pretty indulgent with her. So she's like a very independent character with her own interests, and I really like that, and I love the whole tennis aspect of it, and I loved how she was just such a different historical romance heroine. But she strangely had this competitive side that made her want to be liked by everybody. So it was very hard for me to connect with her character. And there was a couple of conflict scenes that I didn't quite love how they played out. Again, I'm going to talk about this in my vlog more in depth, but I gave this book 4 stars. So it was good, but it wasn't my favorite by Joanna Shupe by any means. And I have another arc that I'm currently reading. I might finish it before January closes out. I still have today and tomorrow to read this arc, but I don't know if I'll be able to finish it. So it's The Devil in Her Bed by Kerrigan Byrne. But I'll let you guys know if I do group it in, but if not, it's gonna go on my February wrap up. But you'll hear about it in the vlog. Anyway, which brings me to my monthly wrap up for January. I won't rehash every single book. I'm just gonna go over generally what are the best books that I read for this month and what were the worst books that I read for the month of January. So I read and completed 45 books, and I DNF'd 2 books. A lot of my highly rated books for the month of January were rereads. I did a lot of Mariana Zapata rereads, and also I reread some Side Changelings for the podcast because we did a whole month dedicated to our favorite Side Changeling couples, the ones that we haven't already done on the podcast because we're obsessed. But those are like really amazing. But the new books that I discovered that I was like blown away by, I'm gonna go over a couple of my favorites for the month of January, starting with The Takeover by T.L. Swan. This is the second book in the Miles High Club, and I love the dynamic between Tristan and Claire so freaking much. T.L. Swan writes pretty long books, but this book was so interesting every step of the way. There were so many different developments in this book. Their relationship changes so much. They start off as enemies because Tristan is in charge of like the mergers and acquisitions of the Miles Brothers Corporation, their media outlet. And Claire is struggling to keep her husband's business alive. She is a widow. She's a single mom of 3 boys, and she does not appreciate Tristan approaching her, and she lets him know it, but they keep running into into each other. There's a conference and he pushes her really hard, and there's a lot of sexual chemistry between them, and he really wants a sexual relationship. And she finally gives in and she's like, well, it's fine. I'm at a conference, I'm not home. This kind of feels like it's a part, like not part of real life. So I'm just gonna give in to the sexual attraction to Tristan. And Tristan's like, that's fine. All I want is, you know, a weekend with you. This is nothing serious. But then they get back to New York and he kind of changes his mind because he's very interested in Claire. And so he goes to her house, and he's greeted with some very angry sons because her oldest son, Fletcher, who is almost 18, discovered men's boxers in his mom's suitcase, and he was so pissed off at his mom. And so he basically attacks Tristan, and the younger one is just kind of like it's crazy and it's amazing, and Tristan like runs screaming from this like crazy place. He's like, oh my god, no woman is worth this. But then they still keep running into each other, and the gradual relationship change between Tristan and the boys is just as compelling as the relationship between Tristan and Claire, and I loved it. It was amazing. I love Tristan. He's so good. Blood Heir was one of my most anticipated reads for 2021. It did not disappoint. I'm obsessed with the Kate Daniels world, and this is the spinoff for Julie, and it's just amazing. I don't know if this is called the Aurelia Rider series because it says a Kate Daniels world novel on the front, but I think on Goodreads it's like Aurelia Rider series, or maybe it's Amazon. Doesn't matter. I don't know what the series is called. I'm kind of confused on that, but I don't know when the second book's going to be coming out. I know that they're pretty particular about their writing process, and they go over multiple drafts for their books, so I'm not expecting it to happen anytime soon. I don't even know if the second book will be coming out next year, and if it will be next year, it probably will be late next year because they still have other series to wrap up, just like the Innkeeper Chronicles. You just don't know when the next book is coming out, but this was amazing. I love being back in this world. You see characters, and this is like 8 years later, 8 years after the events of Magic Triumphs, which is another book that I reread for the month of January, and it's beautiful. And even though we have all those nostalgic scenes with those characters, it really does focus on Julie's relationships, her conflict, and yeah, Derek does make an appearance in this one, and I loved it. So this book was just like a random addition to my TBR, Breaking Perfect by Lydia Michaels. Jenn suggested that I read this book. It is an MMF romance. There's a married couple to start off with, and the husband's former lover from college, who he was very much in love with, he contacts him after like 13 years. They haven't seen each other for 13 years. And this is a romance between all three of the MCs, and it was beautiful. I really loved it. Some very interesting dynamics going on. The heroine has OCD, and she does have some severe reactions, but overall I really enjoyed this romance. Probably one of my favorite menages, especially MMF, one of my favorite menages that I read. It was really, really, really good. And then of course I did like a whole binge of Cora Riley and the Born in Blood series. Like I really loved it, but to take the cake, it was the Kimura Chronicles. There was a couple books in the Kimura Chronicles that just were so amazing. They're my favorite books that Cora Riley has written. So Twisted Emotions is Nino and Kiara's book. It was such a different type of romance. All the Kimuras, the Falcones romances feel very different because they have a very different dynamic in Las Vegas, and the Falcones kind of feel a little bit more dangerous because they're very hands-on, they're bloodthirsty, they're cage fighters, and it just feels a little bit more brutal. Not that the outfit and the familia are any less brutal in Chicago and in New York, but they have a lot of cronies that take care of it. I mean, Luca did like slaughter a lot of people. The Falcones kind of feel a little unhinged, like you don't know what they're gonna do. But Nino is the most like kind of level-headed Falcone, but he is rumored to be the Falcone that does not show emotion at all. Like they label him a cold-hearted bastard, like he just does what needs to be done. And Kiara is part of the familia. She's very nervous because this is a match that needs to happen, an arranged marriage to kind of bring peace, and she's very worried because she's not a virgin. But she was assaulted when she was younger, and she's very nervous about her wedding night for when Nino finds out that she's not a virgin. But the reaction that he has to finding out that Kiara was assaulted when she was younger is perfection. It's what sold me on reading Core Riley in the first place, because he was just like, there's this whole tradition about bloody sheets, like you show the blood of the virgin on the sheets like the next morning, and he was like, yeah, we're gonna have some blood on the sheets, and he goes fetch her uncle, and it's just like beautiful, brutal, savage, and Nino is just what Kiara needs, and it's beautiful. I love the relationship. And then we have Twisted Pride, which is Ramo, the oldest Falcone, the leader of the Camorra, and his book is very enemies to lovers, captive dynamics, so darker than Nino and Kiara, but I loved it. Serafina was such a badass and gave Ramo a run for his money. He never expects her next move. He like cannot anticipate how she's gonna react. He thinks he knows, he thinks he has her pegged, but she never reacts the way that he thinks she will. And I really love that for them. So definitely standouts for this month. Then my favorite book from the Historical Romance Readathon was To Seduce a Sinner by Elizabeth Waite. I really love this. This is the second book in the, oh Lord, I always forget the series title and it's not on here. Oh wait, hold on. This is why I have my Airtable. What a dummy. Legend of the Four Soldiers. This is the second book in the Legend of the Four Soldiers series. And this book also sets up, like toward the end, sets up to Beguile a Beast, which I want to read. I'm probably going to read sometime in February. It was just so beautiful. I loved it because they have a very unexpected first night together. The heroine is expecting it to be like these sparks and magic because she's been pining after the hero for a long time. He was jilted at the altar and she offered, like, I'll become your wife. She's kind of trying to suppress her feelings for him, try not to show him that this is exactly what she's always wanted, is to be with him. And so she's expecting seduction, sparks, fireworks for her wedding night. And he is just like, not... No, he's just like, hey, it's gonna be terrible for you anyway, so let's just like hurry up and get this over with, and I'm really sorry if it hurts, and okay, now it's consummated, bye. And it was like 2 seconds and she was just kind of like, that was terrible. So this is the start of their relationship. It was so different. I loved it. I love that their relationship started off on like the wrong foot, where she was just kind of like, I'm disappointed in this guy who I've been pining after for a long time. And it was just a very unexpected read. I just love it. Now, of course, at the very bottom of this list is Stanton Adore by T.L. Swan, which is crazy. I have a book by T.L. Swan that was one of my favorites of January. And then I have a book by T.L. Swan that was one of my least favorites of January. Like, how crazy is that? So Stanton Adore, it was pretty bad, and I am not reading the rest of that series because it's about the same couple, and I'm just like, I can't deal with that drama. It was so full of drama. I was like over it so early on, and like I said, her books are fairly long, so I was like, can't do it. I actually started reading Play Along, which is another one of her standalones, and I stopped at 45%. I don't know if I'm going to continue it, but I might, so I didn't want to put it in my DNF pile for this month. I might pick it back up again and finish the book, but yeah, we'll see how that goes. Then Bound by Love, which is the second story involving Arya and Luca. I like their book. Theirs was the first book of the Born in Blood series. I like their original book. Fine. It wasn't my favorite, but this book, I just despised Arya and I don't like her. So she was one of my least favorite books in the series, and the Camorra series too. Just like, oh, but definitely Twisted Hearts has to take the cake. That one was my least favorite that Core Riley has written. Savio is a man whore, and I don't feel like she redeems him at all. And like, you kind of have to have at least a little bit of redemption with man whores because they have to be in love with the heroine, and I just did not feel the love. And I also felt like her feelings for him were very puppy love as well. So yeah, it just wasn't the best romance. And of course, The Merman's Kiss, that was just, I don't know what that was, but definitely not going to be reading any more of that series by Tamsin Leigh. And then the two books that I DNF'd were The Day of the Duchess by Sarah McLean, and then Love Unexpected by QB Tyler. I could barely get into this book before I started. I knew it was going to be a hate read because I did not like the characters at all or the situation. I was just like, I'm never going to be on board with this as a romance. I'm not going to believe the HEA in the end, so I just stopped pretty early on, a couple chapters in. Alright guys, so that wraps up January 2021. I would not expect this amount of books every month. I already know, like, I'm very crunched for time now. Even filming videos is a little bit harder for me at the moment, which is crazy because last semester I had way more classes than this semester, and this semester is taking up way more of my time. So videos may be a little bit more sporadic until I get the hang of things for this semester, but I'm hoping that I can get more on track with this, but who knows. Definitely not going to be in like power reader mode for February. So it'll be shorter weekly wrap-ups and a shorter monthly wrap-up as well. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up, and if you're not already subscribed to my channel, make sure that you subscribe to get notified on any future videos that I do. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, life's better with little HEA. Bye guys.